We're going to invite first Minister Fred Mitchell, who's going to come and speak to us on securing our Bahamas through immigration. Please welcome Minister Fred Mitchell as he comes right now.
Good morning, everyone. Right Honourable Prime Minister, my cabinet colleagues, Mrs. Joan Aubrey, I want to thank you for this invitation to speak to you today on immigration matters. The Prime Minister of the Bahamas, speaking in San Jose, Costa Rica, at the annual summit of CELAC leaders, had this to say in his opening statement. The Bahamas wishes also to have a focused and candid discussion on migration. Our country suffers from the ill effects of irregular migration. We think that within this forum, the issue ought to be addressed as to how all countries can take steps to curb irregular migration and how we can work together to stop it and to ensure where there is migration, it is orderly, lawful, and safe. And I end the quote. That is the remit of the Department of Immigration, and we announced two policies in pursuance of that remit which came into effect on the 1st of November last year. The first is that no applications for first-time work permit holders will be accepted in this country from someone who does not have legal status without it being certified that the person has been seen by our consular office in his home country. This is to send out a signal to people who think they can just hop on a boat and come to the Bahamas and a friendly employer will simply get you straight. That should have stopped. Secondly, everyone who is a non-national who does not have a passport should get one, and they will have to have evidence either of a work permit or a residency permit to show they have the right to be in the Bahamas. This applies to people who were born, even to people who were born here of non-Bahamian parents. They are not, by our laws, citizens of the Bahamas. The certificate of identity, which was previously issued to people in that category, will no longer be issued save in fulfillment of our international obligations. You will remember earlier that we announced that as of March of last year, we were going to stop issuing permits for gardeners and maids. That caused quite a slight uproar and not the popular support that this present policy has. However, it is a fact that unemployment can be seriously addressed if we stop doling out thousands of applications for live-in maids, gardeners, and laborers. But many Bahamians, particularly those in the middle class, say that Bahamians don't want to do those jobs, and so it continues. Remember that the principle is that work permits are only to be issued where there is no Bahamian available for the job. Whether Bahamian is available or not is a decision and function of the Ministry of Labor that certifies whether the labor exists. The philosophical basis of all that we do is the fact that migration is a natural state of mankind. Mankind has been doing it for eons. And if you could not make it in the place where you lived, you simply moved to another place. Today, the only caveat is that movement must be documented. And all of this is for the safety and security of the nation state, which began to emerge around the 1500s or so. The Bahamas has an obligation to be sure that it knows who lives within its borders, and that its territory is not being used as a staging point for unlawful activity that would destabilize its neighbors. In addition, there is the concern that the cultural identity and integrity of the country is preserved. We all know that the Bahamas does not have all the skills within its borders to perform all the jobs that are required here. That means labor has to be imported to make up the shortfall. Secondly, we know that one of the important intangibles that we have to offer to the world is the right to live here. This is simply a beautiful place to live in. And we know that living here for reasons of climate, geography, and finance makes the Bahamas an attractive place to be. The question for the Department of Immigration, the government more generally, and our people at large is, what is the price point to extract the premium for the right to live here, in what numbers and under what circumstances? Most advocates say that the offer to live here at a price should stop at the level of permanent residence, with the possible right to work, and that as presently priced, the right to live here as a permanent resident is underpriced and therefore undervalued. Considerable work has already been done on rectifying this pricing structure as we speak. And the question is, when can we convince the Exchequer and the wider government that this is a sensible direction within which to move? The present $10,000 per year fee for permanent residents is considered by many to be too low. While there has been some discussion in civil society about economic citizenship, the idea has not found wide currency in the country and the government. I am certain that you will hear more on this subject from the new Trade Minister, Hope Strachan, as she finds her way in her new office. However, I am confident that there is a new regime and pricing structure coming in the not-too-distant future with regard to the various resident products of the financial services sector. That discussion, however, deals largely with the high-end resident non-Bahamian in the Bahamas. The more vexing question, and the one which has exercised most public attention over the last months, is that of illegal or irregular migration, about which the Prime Minister spoke, particularly at the lower end of the socio-economic ladder. You have thousands of people who jump on rickety boats each year from the south of us and breach our borders. Add to that people masking themselves as political refugees from Cuba, and a smattering of others from other states who seek to smuggle themselves into the United States and use the Bahamas as a staging ground. Last year, we repatriated 5,841 such souls at a cost of $32,000 per trip and an annual budget of $1.5 million. That budget has proven to be insufficient to cover the actual costs of repatriation. In both the case of the documented and the undocumented worker, there is the issue of the efficiency with which this is all exercised. The regular migrants and their would-be employers complain of how slow services are by the department. In the 2 years that I've been on the job, there has unfortunately been no appreciable change in the speed or efficiency with which the processing of applications has taken place, even as the application process has become more difficult with new rules. This is not for lack of trying on the part of the government, but there appears to be a certain management cultural structural issues which defy rational thinking and attempts at change. The issue is in part the lack of manpower, the lack of equipment, and the lack of money. We think that properly applied money, equipment, and manpower can resolve these delivery issues, but we have a long way to go. There is also a need for a cultural change. The conundrum is that we believe that there is money to be found if only the pricing point to which I referred is adjusted to accurately reflect the cost of the service. But there is slow acceptance in the wider society and in the bureaucracy that this is the answer. We've received recently in this direction permission to increase the visa fees, which will more accurately reflect the cost of the service with effect from the 1st of February. That is the point to which we ought to get with regard to all government services. The price ought to accurately reflect the cost of the delivery of the service. You will then be able to fund all the inputs, and there can be no excuse for the lack of timely and rational delivery of the product or service. Indeed, one easy example is to be able to charge a premium for a rush or emergency service. Today, sad to say, if you pay your fees to get a work permit application, it often takes 6 weeks before you have the actual work permit in your hand. We continue to struggle with management issues which are so far not easily resolved. Forgive me, however, if I take the opportunity to speak now to a wider remit, and that is the management issues which face this country, its future, and how we are to deal with it. The solution to immigration, as are many other public policy issues, lies with management and resources. The two are intertwined. I will submit during this presentation that we have a management deficit in the country. We are poorly served in public administration. And if we do not solve this problem, we are going to continue to be mired in slow growth and frustration by the public with the services which they are offered by the government. I'm a politician, as you know, and everything I do is looking toward the next general election and whether we can succeed in that election. I argue that what our country needs is continuity in government. It makes for greater stability and better long-term planning. We do not lurch from place to place every 5 years. That is the great magic of Japan and Singapore. And I think it can be done in the Bahamas without the authoritarianism that's connected with those other countries, but by an effective public administration which is dedicated to efficiency and long-term planning. If we get this fixed, this will help to make the political case for the continuity and the incumbency. Any government executive of the Bahamas of either party ought to feel confident that when they come to office, the public administration will carry out the policies with efficiency without fear or favor. My thinking is that this theme of a more efficient public administration plays exactly to that great group of centrists that elected us in the last election. Rather than playing to the extremes, we need to play to the middle. A report in the business section of the Tribune on the 19th of January about poverty appeared in the business section of the Tribune on the 19th of January, and it talked about poverty and the connection to the failure of getting an education and the skill set, and this was an interesting article. It was based on a report by the Inter-American Development Bank, and it said that people who are poor in the Bahamas have a poor chance of getting a proper education. Thus, in my view, we need to renew the fight and continue to fight poverty. And I'm now using my office to lobby within the government to consider across the public administration the question of a livable wage for employees. You have to ask yourself whether it is conscionable in this day and time to pay a minimum wage of $210 a week when it appears to many that no one can live off $210 per week in this country. As a representative, I see the results of poverty, joblessness, and hopelessness every week in my constituency office. The minimum qualification for government service is 5 BJCs, an 8th grade exam which you take when you are 14 years old. Yet, people who are perfectly capable and intelligent went through school and could not get 5 BJCs, the minimum qualifying standard of the public service, and as I said, an 8th grade education. Some could not take the exam because of lack of funds. One woman in my constituency told me that her mother had to make a decision between herself and her brother, and the mother chose her brother. So she never got to take the exam. The mother could only afford to pay for the brother. And her mother did not know that if you cannot afford to pay, the government would have made it possible to take the exam. So as a result, the girl suffered. There is a connection, in my view, then, between the missed education and the ability of the country to execute complex maneuvers and the inability to grasp the concepts which a sophisticated public administration requires. A good basic education is supposed to be provided to you, and then you should easily be able to pass BJC and BGCSE exams. That then equips you intellectually, even if you don't go off to university. It should equip you intellectually to deal with the complex concepts of managing your own life and ultimately the national life. I sympathize with the Minister of Education, who is struggling with this as we speak, to correct it. Very valued work is being done by the Ministry of Labor in the National Training Agency. The Education Minister is also implementing a national finishing exam for the school system, which will apply across the board. Too many people today are falling through the cracks and do not have the skills to put them into productive work, leaving them angry and bitter at politicians and themselves. Clearly, it has little to do with native intelligence, but training and schooling. Politicians have a mass mobilizing function and are not meant to be bogged down with the public administration. Their remit is to design policies for the peace, order, and good government of the country. We have to ask ourselves the question, why then, when an instruction is given or a decision taken in this country, it is either carried out slowly or improperly or not carried out at all? The other factor is that a public where there is a training or education deficit is too easily manipulated by gossip and not by informed opinion. One man who studies these things in the Bahamas told me that by his count, the same 18 people call the talk shows every day, and these are the people who drive what passes for public opinion, the chronic callers. This then comes back to thoughts on immigration. Despite all that we have said, the opponents of the policies are often able to manipulate public opinion and build up opposition where none is necessary. It often defies logic or rational explanation. The truth does not work, sad to say. And suffice it to say, the policies, though, continue, and they continue, in this case, of course, to have broad support of the public. But this is the exception rather than the rule. So in immigration, new rules are going to be introduced. For example, all schools will be asked to be sure that any foreign national in a Bahamian school has a student permit to be in the Bahamas as of the opening of the fall term. The annual permit now costs $25 with a processing fee of $100, and every non-national should have one now. But we're saying, okay, the fall of this year, including those born to non-national parents in the Bahamas. In a few months, we hope to attach, and I'm just throwing this out for public discussion, I did so in several town meetings in Abaco, conditions to the work permits, and this is presently allowed by the law, which will say that if you get a work permit, you have to have evidence that the worker you are hiring has health insurance for that worker and you are providing adequate housing. And if you cannot demonstrate that, then the work permit will not be granted. This is being put out for discussion, but I mean to bring it to some conclusion. None of these policies, however, can be successful if they do not have the broad support of the Bahamian people. It is in fora like this, that we look and seek support. We think that immigration reform is underway, and we look forward to serving the public in the national interest. So I'd like to summarize where we are. There is a need for a national discussion on immigration matters, including citizenship. There is a need for a manpower study to be done, and one is to be commissioned shortly to project out into the future the numbers for the Immigration Department. And it is my idea that the department, which is now just about 300 people nationwide, that its size over the next 3 years should triple, and we need to know what are the budgetary and manpower implications of that. There is a need to improve dramatically the efficiency of the department in the processing of applications and providing the public with the ability to track them, including the vexing and slow citizenship application process. I want to thank the Association of International Banks and Trust Companies for their offer to help with equipment. A decision was taken by the Cabinet this month to order the next generation of equipment to improve dramatically passport, work permit, residency, and citizenship applications, entry procedures at the border, the ability of different law enforcement agencies to talk to one another, electronic entry at the gate at the airport in answer to complaints of processing at the border of LPIA taking too long. There will be a requirement for everyone in school come September to have a passport and a residency stamp if you are not a Bahamian citizen. Come April, I hope there will be the requirement for health insurance and adequate housing for foreign nationals who wish to get work permits. There are major operations coming in Abaco within 60 days to help stem the tide of illegal migration there. We need the help and assistance and support of the public, and thank them for the support which they have given us. In this connection, I am seeking to establish a public affairs unit within the Department of Immigration. Here again, there is a culture which has to change. Too many times the answer has to come from the minister when the questions and issue which draws the public's attention should be routinely dealt with by an official of the department. My view is that the department has nothing to hide and that all relevant facts, subject of course to national security and privacy issues, ought to be available on request. Lastly, we applaud all that is being done by the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Labor to address the training and education deficits in the country, which will ultimately help change the culture of over-deliberativeness in our public administration. And I thank you very kindly for listening to me.